Hey, hey, welcome back to another episode of The Selfish Woman. You guys are in for a treat today. We have Jene Jackson with us, and Jene is the author of The Oat Project: How I Faced My Fear and Came of Age in One Wild Summer. And it's a memoir about how she finally sowed her wild oats, doing 25 things her preacher's daughter upbringing never allowed, like getting drunk, dancing, skinny dipping, smoking weed, and more. At the ripe age of 37, while being a wife and a mother of three, she was raised all over the US as a preacher's daughter before finally rebelling. When she's not working on her first novel and the sequels to her memoir, she's photographing, belly laughing with friends, making art, singing jazz, or squeezing words from her teenage children while driving them around. I love that. That's such a fun, yummy bio. There's so much in there. I can't wait to dig in. So welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here and to meet and talk and connect.
Absolutely. So I love everything. So why don't we just dive right in? I have so many questions for you.
Got it.
Okay. So you said, I was reading about, your book and some of the things you talked about with your journey. And one of the things that stood out to me is you said you believed that you were broken. I just feel like that's something that so many women actually believe. Why did you believe that?
Boy, howdy. There are a few answers. The first goes back to my upbringing. My father was a Nazarene pastor, and Nazarenes are evangelical Christians, but in this whole holiness realm. And in the holiness doctrine, you believe that God, that when people are born, they're born with a carnal heart, which is a brokenness because of the sin of Adam and Eve. But the holiness tradition is that you can be healed completely of that before you get to heaven. And a lot of religions think, oh, you can't be fixed until you die or reach nirvana, right. So the holiness tradition is remarkably optimistic in a lot of ways. But you're also taught that you're broken from the beginning, and that being broken and then willing to be healed is kind of a proof of the love of people around you in your church, and a proof of your willingness to grow and become a better person. And so it's a very complex way to experience love and care, and yet you remain convinced that you're broken. And I hook, line, and sinker, I didn't really question that belief until quite late in life.
How did that shape you growing up with that belief that you were fundamentally broken?
On the ground, in a very pragmatic way, it made me a church girl. I was a leader. I've sung in front of thousands of people. Singing was my first art, really. And I've taught Sunday school classes. I've always come at it from a slightly rebellious kind of perspective, like questioning everything and wanting to know exactly what the original language meant and how that differs from people. But underneath it all, I knew that something was wrong. I knew that something couldn't really be fixed, no matter how good I was. And I've given myself, I'm over this. But I gave myself so much guilt that I didn't rebel against that it made perfect sense to me. And I grew up with loving parents and a loving family, and for the most part, a loving culture. People around us, they supported us, and it was very much inside of me that I knew something was wrong. And that cultural thing has been something that has taken me several years of therapy to really start peeling away and letting go of the layers of guilt that comes with the brokenness, at least in my upbringing.
And like you said, most of the time our parents have good intentions for us, right? They want us to be happy. They want us to be successful. And yet as kids, we still internalize messages, good intention or not, that become part of our identity. So when you have that not enough message or that, broken message, it's really becomes how we see ourselves in the world. And so I think that's so prevalent for women, regardless of where that message originated, whether it was through parents, religion, society, whatever, the patriarchy,
Right.
it is that message that so many women carry. So I think that's a really common experience. And yet the more we hear women share their stories, I believe the more we can see it in ourselves and then see how we can learn that we are enough just as we are. So I found that really a powerful piece of your story. And then it sounds like that led you to a discovery period in your life where you started pushing against those rules and boundaries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's funny. I look back, I was very involved in a church here, singing in the band and all these things. And then I got pregnant with my daughter, my first child. And something happened around then. I have never been able to put my finger on why the experience of child, birth and pregnancy kind of shifted things for me. But I can actually point to that and say that was really where that questioning began. I left church. I tried to find a church that kind of matched, but it never worked. Never seemed to mesh well. A lot of assumptions about my gifts and, theology. And I do tend to be surprisingly rebellious, like, don't tell me what to do kind of thing. Like I'm a liberal person who also has some aspects of very independent minded. And by the time and backing up a little bit, I have dealt with like deep abiding panic attacks and anxiety and depression since I was a teenager. And in that time, I was having them even more. I was not a happy pregnant person, but they got worse. Like they got worse and they got worse. Like in the experience of being a mother, which is supposed to be this joyful time, back then, nobody talked about being so exhausted and you didn't have an ability to connect with other parents really. Right. And so I just assumed it was because I was broken and that made it worse. And then my third child, Solomon, and he was born in 2006 and he was born dead. I mean, it was a really bad time. It was, he had the cord wrapped and a true knot and he should not be alive. I mean, just really hardcore. And after that, I really started questioning because I watched my child face death. And I experienced it myself. And if that didn't fix it, all of these things that say, face your fears, you'll be fine. It didn't work. Yeah. And so even my book, it really didn't work. I mean, thank God for therapy the last 5 years, but I started questioning all of my assumptions. Right. And that, of course, started with my religion. Sure. I know I had a similar experience coming out of religion where I started questioning what I believed. And I actually went back and was like, do I believe this because I was taught it? Or do I believe this because it's part of who I am? And sort of sorting through those different beliefs I'd held and lived by and questioning them all. And that is such a radical process to go through. And
and what I hear and what you're saying is so much should and
Yeah,
rules
right.
and doing
Yeah.
all the right things. And then coming to a place of like, none of this is working. So what next? And so did that lead you to this wild year that you had, or was it a summer, one wild summer?
Yeah, it did. Funnily enough, I said that I couldn't connect. I didn't have women to connect with online. I met all of these very sort of wild, they seemed wild to me, moms through my daughter's school, which even today is kind of a hub of, it's the only public Montessori school in our area. And so it's kind of this hub for artists and crazy people. And they just seemed amazing to me. And one day we got to talking, and they said, I kind of want to dig in a little bit about this, by the way. For most of my life, a lot of my identity, and I think back to college, even before maybe, a lot of my identity with people was to be the clueless one. The clueless and innocent one who hadn't experienced what they were talking about. And I would go, and it would be funny. And it would feed me in a way, because it would be this sort of, it's okay, approval, but also making people feel good about the fact that I hadn't experienced that.
Right.
So a little bit of the comedian, funny thing going on there. And I clicked right into that in this mom's coffee group when they were talking about drinking. And I was telling them about this conversation that I had with someone about, well, she thought that you don't really know yourself unless you've ever been out of control. And inwardly, the Nazarene Church is very, it's next to holiness. It's self-control is the biggest part of that.
Right.
You don't put yourself into situations where you can get out of control. And it's partly why they were against dancing and drinking and smoking.
Sounds like the Footloose movie.
I identified so much with that girl. I wanted to be her. I knew what she was going through. Yeah. I have a funny story for you about that if you would like to hear it.
Love to hear it.
Okay, yeah. But we'll circle back. But in this mom's coffee group, right? I said, well, she said, and I was kind of expecting them to agree with me. And they were like, wait, you've never been drunk? What? And I was like, no, I don't know,
Innocent.
Yeah. And then my friend Hillary, there we go. And then my friend, who has been my best friend since then, really, she said, what else have you not done? And they started rapid fire. Have you done this? Have you done that? And there's a scene in the book about that. And, and it's almost verbatim of what they said.
Right. And
it led to a project, because I could feel that I wanted to push through and not be the cute, clueless one anymore. I wanted to know, I wanted to understand. And so how was I going to push through my fear? If you ever need anything made into a project, and I'm talking like a national level project or a little project for yourself, just call me, because I can do that.
That's your thing.
Anything. It's a soft skill. But yeah, I immediately went there. I was like, I'm going to make this into, initially it was like fun. I'm going to do some things. Yep. But inside, I knew that I would be terrified.
Yeah. And
that I would need to be accountable and make this work to give my self permission to do it, And so that led to making a list. The original list was 44 things long.
Oh, wow.
So I did cut some things.
It was a busy summer.
It was going to be. I had 3 young children. What was I thinking?
Mama's going out to sow her wild oats.
Yeah. I totally did. And I actually, I mean, I said that a lot. And my daughter still hasn't read the book. And it's okay. You know, even now she's 21, almost 22. And I don't think she's quite ready. Like her dad is kind of her hero. And it's
Well,
not
I think
that,
kids have a transition time where it's like, you're still just my parent. You're not a real person yet.
right.
And then they get to a point where it's like, okay, I'm starting to see you as a real person. Now I'm interested in getting to know you. But right when they're young, even young adults, it's like, no, you're my mom. I need you to stay in the mom
Yeah.
box, right? And it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, it's all good when you're ready. You may never be ready, but you know, when you're ready, we can go there. So what's one of the wildest things you did?
Oh gosh. The wildest things. Well, I mean, okay, getting drunk was quite an adventure in a way. You would think it wouldn't be, but I had to try twice. And I know that doesn't sound wild to anybody. You're like, I have a bottle of wine here. But my blood, it must be Nazarene because alcohol does not agree with me. Like my face breaks out. I get horrible hangovers. I swear I must be allergic to it. And it pisses me off because I can't even really enjoy it at home. And so I decided I was going to do a bar crawl down our main drag downtown with all of my mom friends. Mm-hmm. And we did that. Mm-hmm. But what happened is I was so hyper aware of their needs and like how I was being in public that I didn't get drunk. Like I was probably a little tipsy, but I was not drunk at all. And at the end I was leading them and like saying, do you need a ride home? And, you know, and so I was at this local restaurant a few days later and one of the waiters, he had this weird, he's a cool guy. I'm friends on Facebook with him still, but he was like 19 and he had this weird country accent that was kind of put on. Well, gosh, Jene, you don't need to spend all that money to get drunk. Just come over to our house. I'll throw you a party. I mean, he literally said it like that. And I was like, okay. You know, I didn't really know. And so I'm texting. I have my designated driver person with me. And they were like, go by the liquor store and get this many 40s. This, like, get drinks, right? And he came and his brother even came. And I didn't realize that they were both, I didn't realize they were both underage. Uh-oh. They stayed in the car. And I was like, oh, they must be tired. Like, I had no clue. So I went in and I bought all this alcohol for underage people. It was this, like, they called it the wee. Oh, sorry. I'll try not to get, here, I'm going to move that. Okay. Try not to glare you out with my moon face. Here, then you can cut it.
Yeah, no worries.
What is it doing? So it was called the We, Us, Our House. And it was this sort of commune house on the west side of our city that was like mostly vegans and young men. And that's where he lived. And so I went to a party at the We, Us, Our House and got completely snockered and threw up twice on the way home. You know, like play drinking games, did the whole thing. One.
That's the interesting thing about that is everybody's wild is different, right? It's not about how insane it is or crazy or whatever. It's more about why was it wild for you? And what I hear in what you're saying about that experience was you're watching how you showed up. You were watching how even when you did the bar crawl, you're showing up as sort of that caretaker or the responsible one and seeing yourself in that experience that was out of your comfort zone. So what did you learn about yourself through that?
Boy. And I totally agree with you. It's really about, and that's been a question everyone asks about the book. They look at the list and they're like, this isn't that wild. Like you didn't, do speed or something. And I think in particular with that thing, for me, being willing to lose control of my own self and selfhood in a moment was crucial. I really needed that. I needed to experience that with myself, but also to be in the midst of people who had very different understandings of what wild was, of what was okay. I had a good friend who was there for me. And every time I've gotten drunk since then, I've always been fairly careful. I've definitely done some riskier things since then, like one night stands or whatever. It's been a while, girl. It's been a while. Thank you, COVID. But at the same, and by a while, I mean a very long time. But my hormones are like, no, you need to acknowledge this, Jene. But in that, like, there's a difference. I guess I will say too, I don't know what I learned in that moment. I think it took a long time for me to acknowledge that even with it being for the project, even with having friends around me who were cheering me on, some who weren't, it was okay for me to do that. It really took some distance to be able to even answer your question,
For sure.
Yeah. In the moment, I was very, all the problems in my marriage were becoming very clear through the lens of this project. And my ex and I are incredibly good friends. I talked to him just like 2 hours ago about extension cords, and so, that's fine. But then it was an intense, overwhelming experience. And I will say something too that I can hear that you noticed this. The scene from my second therapy appointment, this was 4 years ago. In my very first appointment, I had brought my book and I said, it'll save you a lot of time if you just read this.
Right.
And to her credit, she did. And 2 weeks later, she brought the book and she said, you talk about your book as though it's about facing fear. But what I see here is self-judgment, And I was like, what?
Excuse me?
Yeah, exactly. I judged myself forever for not seeing that.
I'm judging myself for not seeing me judging myself.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm better at not doing that anymore. But it was, now I call it my pre-therapy book because it is. It's kind of a deep dive into the inner workings of someone who is judging in opposite ways sometimes,
Sure. Yeah. And what I love about that too is that you had these experiences, you threw yourself into stuff. And like you said, it's really the learning comes after the experience. And then you had, you went to therapy and started really digging into that and working on stuff and coming out the other side. What are some of your big takeaways? What are some of your big lessons from that?
I think the biggest is just a sense of gentleness towards myself. I liken it to that first experience of being in love with someone, and you can forgive almost everything. Oh, isn't that cute?
Yeah. Oh, you leave your dirty socks laying around? That's so cute.
It's so cute. So young. Right?
And a year later, you're hating them for it.
Exactly. However, towards myself, I have literally had those conversations. I didn't used to talk out loud to myself a whole lot. I don't really have this inner monologue. I have inner like, oh, I have to write that down. So
Right.
I don't really struggle with monkey mind or, whatever those things are. But outwardly and just verbally to myself, I try to cultivate that sense of amused affection.
Mm.
Look at what you just did. You're so cute. Like,
I love
I
that.
really try to turn that inward instead of reserving that only for other people.
I love that because it's so true. It's like we are so good to other people and we're
Yeah.
so hard on ourselves. But when you can take what you imagine you would say to a close friend or your child or whatever, and you
Mhm.
start speaking it to yourself, it's the self-compassion piece that changes so much of our relationship with ourselves.
Right. And it doesn't have to be like, this 8-hour meditation, it can just be in a moment. And I really did have to cultivate that kind of amusement even with my children. One time, Solomon, my youngest, he was supposed to read a book for class, and I knew he hadn't done it. And I asked him, did you do your homework? I think he was maybe in 6th grade, 5th or 6th grade, maybe 7th. And I was going over to his dad's to take something over there. I think it was the weekend. And he was like, yep, I did it. And I said to his dad, check in. Yep, I did it. I walked into the house holding the book because it was in the back of my car. He was like,
Busted.
Yeah. And I looked him in the eyes and I said, you don't know how many times I have not called you on when I know you're lying to me. I will always know.
Mothers always know.
I will always know. And I was like, you don't know when I'm going to express that I know, but I always know. And he, of course, got sheepish, but I've really tried, like, that saved me as a parent to express it with amusement, like, oh, that's so cute, nice try, good job.
It takes the sting out of it.
It does. It takes the combativeness, and then when I started turning it inwardly, that sense of affectionate amusement, it really changed how I interacted with my everyday life, even.
Right. I love that. Affectionate amusement. Is that what you said? Affectionate
Yeah,
amusement.
affectionate
I love
amusement.
that because it's like, we take ourselves so seriously so much of the time. I think, especially women, I don't know, but we're so hard on ourselves. We're so serious. Everything's a big problem and a big deal. And when you can bring some levity to your self-talk, it helps to remind us that, like, this isn't the end of the world. I know one of the things I use, and actually, I'll tell a lot of my clients to do this, is that affectionate amusement. But one of the ones I do is there's this little song on TikTok and it's like, bitch, you're doing a good job. Bitch, you're doing a good job. And when I'm stressed or whatever, I just sing that to myself, and it's like that little reminder that, like, yeah, I'm doing it. I'm showing up. I'm doing a good job. Right. And it's like, we all need that.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. I'm actually writing it down. Look up.
Let's all write that one down. Bitch, you did a good job.
Totally. I have a good friend who is a very strong presence. And after my book, I had friends, say, you've changed. Like, you really have changed in how you approach life and all those things. And I had said something very, very hard to her in this moment. It was very unlike what I had ever done with her. And she was like, bitch. And I was like, yes.
I'm not being the innocent little good girl. Look at me.
I earned a bitch.
I love it. That's awesome. Another thing that I was curious about, you mentioned that your kids had started growing up and they started needing you less, and you found yourself in that place of, I think so many women, myself included, have found themselves where it's like, who am I when if I'm not a mother anymore? Who am I if my kids don't need me anymore? And that can be a huge catalyst for growth as well. Like, what was that like for you?
Oh gosh, I'm still in the middle of it.
How old are your
day.
children?
Every day. So I had 3 children within 3 weeks of each other, 3 years apart. And
busy.
so we are, if I had stayed together with my ex, May would have been abstinence month. Like,
yeah, right.
It's just, but they're all about to turn. So we start birthday season in a couple of weeks. And so the youngest is about to turn 16, 19, 2 boys, and then 22 is my girl.
Yeah. So you're right in that place of realizing that your time as a hands-on parent is coming to an end. Yeah.
Becoming the consultant, right?
Right. Well, yeah. So has that been a catalyst for you?
Totally. And I mean, to be very, I tend to be just very frank anyway, but to be really, really frank, I feel like a little bit of a mess. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Because internally, all of those things, I've always had especially since the book, I've had a strong sense of my own direction and work, quite apart from being a mom. Motherhood has always been the hub of the wheel. Everything else drops if there's something to do there. I've worked on, and somebody gave me this. I have no idea who. I'm very sorry. Maybe it was my dad. When you remember, for me, it's so weird to remember something from a sermon. It's like, you have a wheel, like your life is a wheel, right? And God is at the center. That was the thing. But for me, family's at the center, and then you have the spokes. And it's not a static list, it's a dynamic wheel. And that analogy has helped in so many ways over the years, because I would have the book or the project or the speech or the work, and then it rotates, and that one is at the top, And I think kids can be on there if it's something that's a non-emergency. Definitely family can be one of the spokes as well as at the hub. But yeah, right now, partly COVID really has a lot to do with it, because if I were still working in the place I was working and then kind of just doing my job stuff instead of trying to make all that I do creatively become the job, which I'm still in the midst of that, it would be probably a little, it's naturally messy when you start things, but then combined with and this is just very like my everyday life, my kids mostly stay at their dad's because he has a bigger house.
Right.
And he's like an introvert. And so he doesn't they love that he goes in his room and he's not like a complete hermit, but
so how are you a mess? Cause we're all kind of a mess these days, right? We're all not okay. And it's okay to not be okay. So how is it that you're not okay in the midst of your kids growing up?
I think what I've started telling them is just need me every now and then. Just be aware that I love how you don't need me. That was the whole point of this, but just every now and then. So there's that kind of affectionate amusement kind of vibe to that. Because I certainly don't want to curtail anything about their lives in order to still be a part of it, like it used to be. When I say that I feel like a mess, it's a lot of the startup things, like with the business, and I'm trying to figure out if I want to get a day-to-day job again, just to make a better foundation financially for myself. and then jump off of that with the next book and the coaching. And I'm going to be doing another cover for my book. Like there are lots of moving pieces that haven't really borne fruit yet, but are getting there. I have to just keep doing them. So individually, like in my own, especially professional life, it feels a little bit messy right now because of all that. Parenting wise, pretty solid. Like my relationship with my daughter has been getting better. She was very, she's a papa's girl, really, and always has been. And so that's been getting better over the last few years. And yeah, it's, I think it feels messy because right along with the parenting, right, comes the midlife thing. Like I've never been a numbers person. I don't really talk about age unless somebody brings it up. And so I end up in a house with a bunch of underage boys getting drunk for the first time, because I didn't think about it. And that's always been true. But I'm 52. And now it's kind of like, what, like, there's some wonder and awe in that. And some kind of messiness, kind of emotional, you could call it emotional complexity, but I'm okay with messiness. I think that's where life comes from, is the tilth. And
I mean, you're in the messy middle of the what was before, what's coming ahead, and you're in that messiness of figuring a lot of stuff out that hits so many women at midlife. As the kids get older, they don't need us as much. We look towards more of our dreams, what we want to create, but we're not there yet. That can be a really challenging place to be. So how are you meeting your needs through this time? Like, what are you doing for yourself to make sure that you're, staying on the right track?
Right. So this is going to sound really self-evident to you, and I hope many women, but I have never had such a strong posse of women in my life. They are amazing. I don't necessarily see them in person a whole lot of the time, but I have one friend who was actually the owner of the place that I was working, just a part-time kind of job as I was writing and doing other things. And that was closed because of COVID. And so over the last year and a half, we've both been working on our businesses together through all the creation stages. And then a couple of artists, one that I go hiking with. I really appreciate your question, because I am doing some things that work, I'll tell you about one thing actually that I learned very early, and it's working. I'm not saying that I'm really good at this, and I'm not even going to say that I can roll out a list of things that, like dramatic changes, but it's been profound. So, February, well, the job that I used to have was at a juice bar. So, and an all organic, all vegan juice bar. And so every single day, and this is Colorado Springs, we were right down the street from the Olympic training center. We're used to lots of people coming in and out. It's a tourist economy. And so I would see people who were sick several times a day because they would come in for the immunity shot. I'm so sorry I didn't bump that. They would come in for an immunity shot for things that would help them feel better, right? So seeing sick people was just a normal thing. I'm almost certain, I never got it confirmed with blood testing, but I'm almost certain that I got COVID very early, even before the whole thing blew up. Right. It took me the last half of February through almost April, May to get over this thing that just attacked my lungs.
Mm.
I was never hospitalized. I was immobilized almost. And in the worst days of that, I could not, I had that debilitating fatigue that everybody talked about.
Yeah.
And what happened is that because I was so beyond tired, I had to like sink down and melt down into every, like the smallest moments and say to myself, what do I want to do right now?
Mm.
And so I started looking at it as this practice, almost like lifting a new kind of weight or movement, and really digging in and listening to the smallest desire. And it became like a muscle, and I would do what I wanted to do. And it almost makes me cry because I feel like I need to get back to that state a little bit right now.
Right.
But it was like an exercise, like it was an experience beyond what I've ever had.
Mm-hmm.
I've been in places where I could just choose where I wanted to go, choose what I wanted to do, but there were always other things imposing their own agendas or that, I got to go to Paris in 2016, but you're in Paris, so there are all kinds of have tos there. Sure. Like you have to go here, or you have to see this. This was an extended period of time where I chose in the moment, I'm going to go lie on the ground in the sun. Okay. That's all I could do for most of the day. Right. I'm going to go wash 5 dishes,
Yeah.
But it was really listening to my own body. And I have never had that experience I couldn't be with my people because I was going to make them sick. I was mostly picking up my kids from school still. But for a while there, I couldn't even do that. Like my ex took care of that for me because I was so fatigued. And that became like a muscle. And I really strongly believe that is what we are actually supposed to be trained in, right? We are supposed to train our children. We were supposed to be trained to listen to what we want,
right?
And move from that place and make mistakes and grow and learn how to not only take care of ourselves and be the selfish woman, but that creates a foundation, which I'm sure you agree with this too. But I mean, I don't know, maybe you disagree with me. That would be exciting. But like being selfish creates self-centered. It creates a foundation from which then we can be unselfish.
Oh, absolutely. We can't give from an empty cup. So if you're filling yourself up, you have more to give everyone in your life. That's the premise. And I think what you're talking about really listening acutely, and what is that one small thing I want or I can do. And I haven't had COVID, knock on wood, but I mean, our listeners have probably had it, or they probably know someone who's had it, right? It's just, and you hear this over and over, is that it's so exhausting and there's so little energy that you can barely feed yourself, let alone be productive. And I think that's such a great point for people to take away from this is, if all you can do is lay in the sun or wash 5 dishes, just listen in and really ask yourself, like, what is that I need right now? And that can be such a gift to have no distractions, nothing else that you like, everything's taken away from you and life becomes very granular and quiet and simple and small. And that's such a great reminder for when life gives us those opportunities.
Well, and then, to imagine that it's like you're going to an inner gym there, and strengthening that muscle can have such profound effects on every other aspect. When we allow the should to overwhelm the niggling thing in our gut, that we're often taught to do that. If your desires are suspect because they might be carnal, there's the religion There's the religious side, but there's a strong tradition of it without any religion.
Absolutely.
And so I really understood and hoped for and have kept trying to cultivate that, to understand what I really want. And it's still a bit messy,
right?
Because if somebody just gave me, I think a really good thought experiment is to say, if money weren't an object, right? If money weren't a consideration with this, which this has gotten me into trouble because often I disconnect the money thing, and we can talk about that later. I'm not gonna do everything. But if it were, what would you be doing? Like, where would you be going? And for me, I've had to kind of ratchet that back and say, well, money is an aspect. And so how do I just approach that with what's going to move me forward in what I really want?
Yeah. It's a great question to ask, because it takes off the limitations, takes off the rules, and it allows us to daydream a little larger. Even if we're never going to do it, we're expanding our ability to imagine what's possible. And I think that's what I hear in what you're saying, is that, when we ask ourselves, like, yeah, what would we do if money wasn't an object? It's like you said, building that muscle. One of those muscles is the one of wanting, awakening the wanter or the dreamer. And women have been shut down in that, and like, don't want for more, be grateful for what you have. And it's like, yeah, it doesn't have to be one or the other. We can be grateful and still have dreams, right? And yet we're so afraid to have dreams and desires, because we've been taught that we should be selfless. And so, it's like, don't want for those kinds of things. That's bad. And so many parts of society have taught us that. So I really like that question.
Yeah. Be selfless, but also be independent and don't need anyone.
Right. So it's like, okay, which one is it? I saw a picture the other day, and it said, if you're not full of yourself, what are you full of? I was like, that's damn, good. I like that one.
Right? That's good. The one true life.
Yes. Okay. So I got a few questions before we wrap up.
Okay.
How has being selfish changed your life? And I know this is like all of what we're talking about, but if you could see like one example of like where you really put yourself first and it changed something big for you.
I'm thinking, about the book, and that was a long time ago. That was in 2007. I want to answer the complex question, but in the background, I'm going to think about in another way. Beginning with the book, I called my writing work because I needed to justify it, the freedom to go away from my young children, instead of just saying, I need time away, right? I started calling myself a writer in 2001 when my daughter was about a year and a half old. And she was an extrovert, and I was just exhausted, like most mothers. And so I called it work, and I made it into work. I wish that I could go back to myself and say, you deserve time away and just to have fun.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need to do this unless you really want to.
Right.
I probably would respond to myself and say, I do want to, and so being selfish in that particular way, even though it came out of a sense of needing to justify my behavior in the face of self-judgment, but doing that has allowed me over the years to finally respect my own work, even if it doesn't necessarily show the successes that I want for it. Are you an artist only if you sell your work? Are you a writer only if you become a bestseller?
Exactly.
And so there has been a growing sense of understanding and acceptance of myself and just what I want to be in the world. But it came from that core of saying, my work is worth time, like the time that it takes.
Right.
And that wouldn't even be a question. It's almost never a question if it's a man.
Yeah.
I'm not like, always going to the gender difference, but it is there, right? With women's work. Yep. And I've slowly really almost to the point that it's a self-evident truth to me. Like it's weird to me if someone questions whether my work is worth it or not.
Right.
Even as I ask myself those questions and look at markers and, do all the analytic stuff. It took a very long time for me to accept that selfish or self-centered, those things are at the core of being who we are in the world.
And we do the best we can with what we know at the time. And what I hear in what you said about, calling it work so you could kind of give yourself permission to do what you want to do. It's like, do whatever you got to do. Like, if that's what you got to do at the time to give yourself what you need, it's like you're giving yourself permission and that's what you needed. And now you're in a totally different place. Now you're giving yourself permission because you're worth it and you don't have to, spin it a certain way. But I think that's a really beautiful answer because it shows how we can do what we need to do at the time. And then when we know better, we do better. But sometimes that knowing better comes from those steps where we're just doing what's present and available to us in the moment. And I think that's a really cool example of something that I know probably every woman struggles with is like, how do I give myself permission to do what I want to do while I still feel guilty or feels wrong or I'm worried about what people will think? It's like, okay, find the way to do it, whatever you need to do. And, have a lot of compassion and grace with yourself because we're never going to arrive where it's always going to feel great or feel easy, right? We're always growing and evolving. So it's like throwing compassion back to that woman who is like, I'm going to work, it's like, going to do that work so I can be alone and do my thing. It's like, do what you got to do. Bitch, you're doing a good job, right?
Yeah, exactly. You're doing a good job.
Yeah.
One of my, when I was very low financially, this is maybe 10 years ago, I was like, I always get back to this place of what do I already have? And what are my resources that I can, leverage and do this? And I was like, okay, I'm going to become a kind of a stealth coach. Like I'm going to be like, kind of like that, but I'm going to call myself the justifier. And then they can just call me and I'll spin it, however they need. And it only took me like 3 minutes to realize that was a really bad idea.
The justifier, it's like the Ghostbusters, right? It's like, who are you going to call?
You could murder that person, and then you could spin it like that.
Let's figure a plan. No, maybe not the best idea. Yeah. Okay. Well, we're already talking about your past self, but if you could go back in time to your little girl self, that little girl that you talked about, and tell her one thing, what would you say?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm so sorry, but I'm just going to have to do the cliche because it's just true. But I would tell her that she is enough and brave.
Yeah. You know what? I ask everyone this. And so far, everyone has said the same thing. And I believe that is so indicative of what women need to hear. We are enough. And if we had been told that as a young child in the way that would have resonated, who knows where we'd be now, and we can tell ourselves that now.
Yeah.
And every time you show up for yourself and you don't abandon yourself and you speak kindly, with that affectionate amusement, you're telling yourself like, I'm enough. And you're telling your little girl self, I'm enough. And so I'm really excited about hearing this, because it's proving to me that that's what women need. Is we need to know we're enough, regardless of what you're doing, regardless of your job, regardless of how much money you make or how productive you are. All of that is bullshit. It's like, when we believe we're enough, that's everything.
Yeah.
So
It's everything.
love that. I really love that.
I love that you've heard it from every single that's
one.
Amazing.
Different versions, but it's all comes down to that.
Yeah. Even the kind of the really tough things, there's a way of looking at the world that we all choose everything, right? We choose the hard circumstances that we come into contact with. We choose where we were born, like in an energetic soul kind of way, right? And I had a lot of trouble with that at first, thinking, why would I choose something that would cause me pain? Why would I choose something that would cause half of my life at least to be somewhat disassociated, I always say it wrong, dissociated, like, all of that judgment and all of those things that I've had to overcome. And an image came into my mind at one point, and this is kind of hard to communicate, and it has to do with being enough. An image came to me of my little girl self as facing the hard thing that was going to cause me a lot of pain. And, there are so many instances of that throughout life, right? But of like grounding down and being brave, like choosing it, not because I wanted to inflict pain upon myself, but because I knew that I needed that to grow and be the person that I am, energetically in a soul sense. But that it also takes bravery to do that it's not weakness to have chosen it, or weakness for me to have fallen for religion, hook, line, and sinker. It was actually a brave act to get to the place where I could understand, and this is the part that's hard. I'm going to try. I don't care if you cut anything, but
don't worry about it.
Yeah. So much of, I feel like women in particular, right? We go through all of these times in our lives when we get kind of sidetracked. Like even the last 2 years could be that for my life with COVID, right? All the isolation or when you're a new mom, or when you don't have like a meaningful job. I mean, all kinds of ways we feel like we're not living up to our potential, or we're in kind of a holding pattern, either waiting on ourselves to grow or waiting on something to transform. And especially maybe at my time of life, although maybe not, we feel like that's wasted time, right? It's just, like I can look back on all the time that I spent before I really came alive as a being and a person and became selfish. I can look at that as wasted time. Like even including, I mean, the only thing, my kids, like, okay. I did write a book. People have to keep reminding me that was a thing, but is it wasted? And what I came to understand is that picture a mountain pass, right? There's rock on one side and rock on the other, and the path through it. And those times in our lives are like that path. There's nothing there,
right?
Except maybe air. Yeah. Don't get me started on quantum physics, but you can see that on my show someday. I'm going to talk physics someday, but there's nothing there, and yet it would not be useful or even exist if there were rock there. That's just a mountain then. And I began to see these times in my life and really a long period as, people talk about it like, oh, that was a really hard thing that I had to overcome, or that was a really hard time. And, that it had to have some meaning, and it does, but those empty kind of times, or the kind of times that we go through things we don't necessarily we didn't want to go through, they are just as real and meaningful and important for zero reason, you don't have to create meaning out of them. They just are life, and they are just as real as the air that creates a mountain pass. It not only was it, sure, you learned lessons, sure, we grew, sure, we became something, it of course figures into how we are as people, but it was also, that's not its only value,
right.
There was life there. There's life there. And it's just as important and just as real. I think of it in a layered way as well.
Sure. Yeah.
Weird.
Yeah, no, I get it. I get it. I think we're always trying to make meaning out of everything, and that's just what our brains do. But looking back on, I can think of my own life, and there's times where it's like, what the fuck was that about? Like, like that had no meaning, and I still don't know to this day why I had to do that or go through that, and yet it still just has meaning because it existed. And like you say, within those moments, there's happiness, there's sadness, there's joy, there's living, there's life. And that in itself is meaningful because we lived, and we don't always have to have like a tiny little bow around it.
Right. Those meanings were enough.
Exactly.
I know why I think of it as layers. Because it's Colorado and you're up north too. So like insulation, right? Like insulation, like down coats or anything that you wear, it's always layers.
Right.
The real thing that makes that work is air.
Right.
It's not the material that keeps you warm, it's that it holds air.
Right. Yeah.
Which is empty and nothing in some ways, Yeah. And I always think of that like when I put on layers.
I love that, as we are these days. Okay. If you had to get a tattoo right now, what would you get?
Well, here, I don't know if you can see.
Yeah.
So my current tattoo goes, my big toe is not on the cover. It goes from my big toe all the way up around my body to my back.
I love that.
A whole story in itself. And so I always joked that I would never, I have no need of another tattoo. They're like, did you get a tattoo for the book? And I'm like, yeah, it's one big long line of a tattoo. But two things. One would be my original idea, which was like a Girl Scout badge. And it says something like, good job.
Bitch, you're doing a good job.
Exactly. Right there. Yeah. And then I've joked with my artist daughter, I might have her do this year. Like for every holiday, I would like put little people marching up my leg, like so, in character. So it would probably be something stupid like that.
I think that's awesome. I love those ideas. Okay. What's one of your favorite books? Besides yours, of course.
Oh, thank you. Dune.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I'm a Dune head. I've read the original 6 like 20 times. Yeah, I'm a true Dune nerd. Yeah. Would you like to know one of my favorite quotes?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. So one, it's actually in the beginning of my book. and it is face your fears or they will crawl over your back.
Okay. All right. That's a good
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
I love it. Okay. Last question. How are you being selfish these days?
Oh, okay. I'm going to be super real. Is that
We're all
okay?
about real here.
Like,
so
instead of like worrying about
please.
how, yeah. So, um, so after I stopped working, like after the store closed because of COVID, I was like, I'm going to start a store and I'm going to finally do all the things. And it hasn't, I can say that it hasn't panned out, as though it's something external, but I also look at that and it took me a really long time to get energy back.
Mm-hmm.
And it's finally like really better and it's good. It's all building. But I feel like I've been super selfish by not getting a 9-to-5 job. And really like I subsist on so little right now, which I love. And one of the selfish acts for myself that I really hope to do over this next year is to become really good at the middle ground,
right,
of, having an income, but not all the way to the point where I don't have to worry about anything,
right.
So I'm really good at poverty. Really good. I got that, but yeah, I've been being really selfish about that. Even though, and I can say this to you, even as I have been working on my resume and I'm considering applying for a job, which would also be selfish because then I wouldn't like be able to pick up my youngest kid from school and do a lot of things that, it's kind of messy.
Well,
but
I think a
selfish
lot
about
of people can relate to not having a 9-to-5 these days, and COVID's kind of allowed people to see how much that has sucked their soul out of them, and that they just don't want to do that anymore. And they're being more creative and finding ways to make income in different ways. And that's been, I think, a lot of people's journey. And then other people love their 9-to-5, but I think they're both, as long as you're doing it because it's what you want to do, then that's your selfish strategy, right? And so like go for it. Right. Okay. Yeah, amazing. So how can people find you? How can our listeners get into your world?
Okay, let's see. So the book is available on Amazon. So I can say that here.
We can put the link in the show notes.
I'll do that. Yep, this is it. It is not a small book, but it has many small sections. So yeah.
Exciting.
And as an artist, I can tell you, by the way, this represents about 82 million different decisions. Like I actually found that font. Like, amazing. Books should cost $100 or something.
Oh God, yeah.
Right. And then on Facebook, it's Jene J, which I geek out about. It's being a palindrome, so it's JENEJ.
Mm-hmm.
So Jene Jackson. And then Yoni Flower Collections. You can see the store that I created over the last year and a half. I started putting my own photography on leggings. And then I'm like about to drop hoodies and sweats and stuff. Cool. It'll be, it's still a baby store as far as it's still new. But it's a place where I get to indulge and not just indulge, but make my photography have legs, kind of.
Right.
And then I have a show every Sunday. Probably it's been at 10 o'clock in Mountain Standard Time. I'm so sorry. My cat is right there. Oh. She just jumped onto the table. But you'll hear the meow in the audio. So Facebook, I do the Facebook Lives, but there's also an Instagram. I do have Instagram as well, which is where my photography really lives. And it's Spiral. And then the YouTube channel. So yeah, YouTube channel for the Church of Wild, which we can get into another time. it kind of describes how I interact with the world, in a
Right.
very general sense. And then JeneJackson.com. I'm about to launch a course. I have not launched it yet, but by the time you guys hear, it'll be launched, on how to integrate the wild into our everyday lives. So a lot of just introspection and leading y'all through that, but also some tips on how I kind of worked around it, even in the midst of not necessarily really being a solidly, authentically selfish person,
Right.
in the way that we talk about.
Yeah. So I'm sure that'll all be on your website.
Yeah, it's all there. Yes.
And we'll have links in the show notes so people can know exactly where to find
you.
you. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today.
Oh, it's been wonderful. I feel very connected to you in so many ways, and what you put on, your content, almost, not even almost, it just always hits some part of what I'm experiencing. And to know that someone is looking at our world through the lens of, this doesn't work anymore, and how can my perspective change it? You've really inspired me.
Thank you.
To speak. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I love hearing that. And yeah, as we find our voices and speak our truth, we are lifting other women up to do the same. That's how we're going to fucking change the world. So
amen. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, thanks so much, Jene.
Thank you.
And have a great day. And we will talk to you guys soon.